Hello and welcome to Strip Down Sunday. My name is Reverend Ryan Alexander, and we are Soul Evolution Collaborative. And so we're so glad that you've joined us as we offer this kind of strip down, streamline approach to your Sunday morning. And so we have just this amazing desire to bring the messages of the spiritual principles to the world. And we know that through their application, we can truly create a world that works for everyone, a world that everyone benefits from. And so we here are dedicated to not only personal transformation of our everyday lives, but communal evolution and how we can show up in the world. And so, two really quick things before we jump in. Everything you'd want to know about Soul Evolution Collaborative, you can find on our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. And so it's communities like ours that seek to, like I said, bring these messages, these principles to the world and create lasting change, create a really shift in how we view ourselves and how we view the world and how we interact with one another. And so if you're in any way in alignment with this mission and are able to, we encourage to continue to help us in our mission. And we gratefully welcome your support. So donations can be made at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. And together we can begin to really create this dynamic and lasting change in our world. So, this week's topic is we're going to jump right in. This month, we've been talking about relationships. And so, this week, we've really been looking about relationships, the us. Like, how do we show up in groups? How I come to a group and the groups that we create, and how, and taking a closer look at those. And so, I guess a subtitle or a subtext of this topic is belonging versus fitting in. And so these concepts, this belonging and fitting in, they aren't earth-shattering concepts. So you may not hear anything completely earth-shattering or new today, but maybe a different way, maybe a different urgency, if you will, of how to actualize these concepts in our everyday lives. And I think that this idea of belonging versus fitting in, the necessity of it and the necessity of creating communities that actually foster it has reached an all-time high. Like, it's imperative, I think, for our ability to create a sustainable life together here on this planet. It is imperative that we begin to shift the narrative. So no longer are we showing up in these groups or showing up in our lives just to fit in, but instead we are shifting this understanding of what it means to belong. And what does it mean to create communities where that is the highlight, where that is the non-negotiable. And so I wanted to start out with a quote by Brene Brown in Gifts of Imperfection, because I really think that in reading a lot about these concepts of fitting in versus belonging, I think she really hammers home the really stark distinction between the two. And so she says that fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. But belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. And so there's really this distinction of fitting in, where we go into a situation or a group or anything where we have to figure out, okay, assess ourselves in comparison with someone else, and how do I need to show up? What parts of myself do I need to hide? What parts of myself do I need to kind of tone down? And kind of assessing and comparing and then showing up like that. And so often that creates this interaction with others where they're just kind of seeing who we want them to see. And I'll just say it for me, who the person that I want people to see. So I show up that way. And so I have these interactions, and people are having interactions with a persona, maybe, little hints of who I am, but not the entirety of who I am. And so I think for us to begin to shift the perspective, begin to shift how we show up in groups, begin to shift how these groups can impact our society and our world, we really have to begin to cultivate this idea of belonging. And so to truly belong, I don't have to change who I am. I can show up who I am in my strengths, in my challenges, and the things that I struggle with, or the things that I am amazing at. I can just show up as myself, and that vulnerability to show up that way. And when I do that, I invite other people to do that. And then we begin to have this dance, this dialogue, this interaction with others that is real, that it's not this surface level, like what can we do just to kind of get along, but instead it begins to have this depth to it, this kind of this deepening of our experiences. And when I can do that, then I can see you for who you are and for your experiences and for your story and for the things that have led up into this point. And I can honor that. I can have compassion for that. I can appreciate that. And so when we begin to do that, we begin to nurture this dialogue, nurture this relationship that begins to have this ripple effect on the outpicturing in our world. And I think that, this idea of when we talk about groups, when we talk about belonging, those spaces and community and cultivating those spaces to belong, um, sometimes it can feel a little uncomfortable, I think, because at least I have been, and I think a large percentage of us have been, kind of bought into this idea of rugged individualism. And I'm really here to say that rugged individualism and fitting in is out. It's like so 2020. But this idea of belonging, this idea of community, this idea of cultivating intervulnerability, that is so 2022 and beyond. So that we can begin to see how these concepts of rugged individualism, these concepts of fitting in, these concepts of how kind of molding ourselves to be something we're not in order to be accepted or to fit in, or and how we require other people to do that in circumstances. How really that kind of creates a kind of a chokehold on this idea of belonging, and so we can really begin to take a look at that. And so in that kind of vein, like what is the value of community? What is the importance of it? What is this importance of belonging, and how when we cultivate these spaces of belonging, like how does it practically affect us as individuals? And how do we practically affect others as we create space for them? And so I was reading a book recently by Francis Weller, and it was called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And he is a therapist, and specifically some specialties in grief, grief counseling and whatnot, and facilitating groups and rituals around grief. He had this concept where he talked about the bottom, and that community, that those spaces where we can belong, those spaces where we can cultivate this idea of belonging, serve as our bottom. And that seems kind of silly, but it's going to make sense in just a moment. So he posits that when we have, situations in our life, for example, grief or challenging emotions, sometimes in this idea of private pain and rugged individualism, we can't see the bottom. That we feel like if we sink into these emotions, if we express our vulnerability, that we'll never be able to come out of it, that it will just envelop us and swallow us, and there is no bottom to it. But he says the interesting thing happens when we have communities or individuals or places that we can go and really express our vulnerability, express our authenticity, especially in these areas of difficult emotions or grief or loss or challenge, that community serves as a bottom, that we can rest into it. And when we can do that, then we can explore the depths of these emotions, the depths of grief, the depths of life that come into our awareness, because we know that there's a bottom. We know that there's something to hold us. We know that there's something as we're going through these things, as we're allowing them to flow through us, that there is that bottom of community, that bottom of belonging that really holds us. And it enables us to do our personal work, which I think is just amazing, that it is through this idea of community, through this idea of belonging and cultivating those areas, that we have the safety to do our personal work. We have the safety to show up and say, you know what, I don't have it all together, but I'm trying. I don't know all the answers, but I want to learn. I want to be open. And this really has texture within the context of community. And so when we think about creating a world that works for everyone, a world that works for all, it begins. And sometimes we get really paralyzed by this idea of creating this. We have this vision of how we want things to outpicture, and we get really paralyzed because it seems so far removed from where we are now. But the first step, I think, in actualizing this vision, actualizing this desire that we all have, is starting in those spaces and groups that we can create this idea of belonging. Whether it's in our spiritual communities, whether it's in our families of origin, whether it's in our chosen families, whether it's in our social groups, those people that are in the sphere of our influence, as we begin to cultivate these small little pockets where belonging is the norm and fitting in is a thing of the past, then we begin to really become the catalyst for that to spill over in everything that we do. It can't help but do that, because when I show up as who I am, and authentically, and I have safe space, and I allow other people to do the same, then it becomes this just cascading effect. And then we see this transformation, this cultural shift, this global shift of what it means to create a world that works for everyone, where everyone has a place at the table, where everyone feels a sense of belonging. And so ditching this goal of fitting in and setting the new standard is belonging, out with the old goal of fitting in, because honestly, trying to kind of fit a big life into a little tiny box. And in the end, we lose the essence of who we are. And that has lasting impacts on ourselves, on our physical and our emotional and our mental and physical well-being, and being able to step out of the fitting in model and into this model of belonging. And we do this getting to know ourselves and who we are, by being no longer satisfied with living any other way but our authentic selves. And by really cultivating this responsibility, not for one another, but to one another, that I have the responsibility to show up as my authentic self. And in doing that, I extend my responsibility to you and everyone that I meet to create a space to do the same. And it's then that we begin to see the shift. It's then that this urge that is yearning to be brought forth, and we see it. You can feel the energy of it in our world. Old paradigms, old things are falling away, and the new way, a different way, a big L life way is wanting to be emerged. And it begins with belonging. It begins with cultivating these in our sphere of influences, in our groups. And so Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science in Mind, kind of speaks to this idea when he says, the great experiment is in our own mind. Here, in the integrity of our own soul, in the simplicity of our own heart, we can prove what the ages have longed for, lived for, prayed for, that at last, though we have not known it and the world has not suspected it, divinity has temporarily clothed itself in humanity. And so when we begin to cultivate these communities of belonging, these communities where vulnerability is seen as valuable, then we can begin to see more and more that individualized expression of the divine is being clothed in, as, and through us. And that shifts how we see ourselves, that shifts how we see others, and it ultimately shifts how we create a sustainable life together. So I'm in. I hope you are. And I know together we can create a world that truly works for everyone.